All right, so welcome everyone to our second webinar in this six-part series on the academic job search. So we're really excited to have you here again. Today's session is focused on how do I prepare my application, the fun part of getting everything ready to go. So as we mentioned last week, if you're just joining us, there are three of us who are hosting this six-part series. So we have Bree Jimenez, who is at the University of Texas at Arlington, me, Jess Tost, University of Texas at Austin, and Sarah Powell, who's at the University of Texas at Austin. I promise we didn't purposefully only choose people at University of Texas institutions, but it worked out that way. So you probably, if you were here last week, you know we kind of went through an overview of the job search process. Today we're going to focus on application materials, and then hopefully you've signed up and you'll get reminders for the upcoming sessions. So next Friday we'll talk about what to expect in the initial interview, then we'll go on to talk about the on-campus interview, the job talk, and then final offer and negotiations. If you were able to contribute a small donation last week, that is awesome and very much appreciated. It is an optional donation, but if you want to contribute even a small amount, $1, $2, $5, $10 to CCDR, you can go to this tiny URL. It's tinyurl.com/CCDR donate, or you can scan the QR code. This really helps with programming and continuing to offer stuff in the future. And don't forget to join DR as well if you don't already have a membership. So we are going to, as we did last week, continue to put questions in the chat. So Sarah is going to be presenting this week, and I will monitor the chat. And so we will kind of ongoing, as questions come up, pause and answer them. And we'll save them, any that don't fit in the moment or any that come up later, we will spend time at the end answering questions as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah.
All right, thank you so much, Jessica. So today's webinar is all about how do you prepare your job application. And we're going to focus on two things. How do I prepare a CV, and how do I write a cover letter? And so we're first going to focus on the CV, and then we'll focus on the cover letter. And we're really going to be focusing today on faculty position jobs. So we showed this chart last week about the different types of faculty position jobs, but we'll be focusing on jobs that you might be applying for that are tenure track or non-tenure track, and those that are at teaching-focused universities or research-focused universities. So hopefully you can use this information if you're also applying for a postdoc position or another type of position, but primarily our focus here today are faculty positions. So first, let's think about how do you prepare your CV? So your CV, or curriculum vitae, is a document that shows who you are as a scholar. And today we want to focus on two things that are really important with your CV. First is the structure of your CV, and then second is the look of your CV. Now, in terms of the structure of a CV, there can be a lot of information that you want to put on it, and that's okay. A CV is an extended resume. So probably a lot of you, when you were in high school or during your undergraduate program, you had to put together a resume. And people would say, that should only be 1 or 2 pages long. Well, guess what? A CV throws that rule out the window, and a CV can be as long as you want it to be, but you also don't want it to be overly long. So typically your CV, if you're just finishing your PhD program, might be anywhere from 4 to 10 pages or so. And the structure of that CV, you get to come up with that structure, but there are some common elements to include in your CV, and we're going to talk about 12 of those common elements now. Now, I'm going to show you my CV when I was on the job market a little over 10 years ago. And then I'm going to show you some CVs from some of our current DR members. And then we're also going to get feedback from other DR members about how they put together their CV. But you're going to see that every single one of these CVs looks a little bit different. So the thing that you need to think about is what is important to include on your CV. It might not look exactly like the colleague that is sitting next to you, but there are some important structural components that most CVs include, and those include the following. First, include your contact information. For most people, this goes at the very top of the first page. You can see I have an example there. And you're typically only going to include your name and your contact information. You might want to include your address, but sometimes people don't include that. Really here, only place in public information. I have found that my CV has made its way to the internet before with my old addresses. And so if you're not comfortable posting your address, definitely you do not have to post it. And another thing is use a professional email. You may want to use your school-based email, or you might want to develop a professional email. Your email shouldn't say I love giraffes at gmail.com, which is true for me. I would only want to use a professional email here at the top of my CV. And I say at the top of my CV, I've seen some more CVs recently that are a little bit more designed. So sometimes they might have all their personal information on the left-hand side, and then they start their publications on the right-hand side. Do feel free to have some creativity with what your CV setup looks like. Now, after you present your contact information, a lot of people will present their research interests, or if you're applying at a teaching focused university, maybe your teaching interests. This is just 1 or 3 sentences that briefly describes who you are. Now, I didn't include that on my CV, but if I were to include it, I probably would have written something like this. But it just helps the reader of your CV understand in a nutshell who you are, what you like to research or teach, and maybe how you might fit into a specific job. Now, beyond research interests, excuse me, you want to include your education. Almost everyone includes this on the first page of their CV in some way. Here you would only list the things that you've done recently, so your PhD. Do note if it's pending, so don't list a year if you actually haven't received your degree yet. If you are going to receive your PhD in 2021, I would probably put 2021 and then in parentheses pending, or expected. You may want to include your dissertation title here if it hasn't been published yet. And most people will typically list their education from the most recent to the most distant past. And I'm going to keep up that pattern on my CV, and you'll see that on the other CVs that we look at today, they do the same thing. So you list from recent to past. Then you may want to include academic employment. And this is especially important if you've already had some type of academic job. But if you haven't had an academic job, go ahead and leave this part off your CV. You don't have to use these headers if they don't apply to you. Now, if you were a 3rd grade teacher, or you've been another type of a research assistant, typically that's going to be placed later in your CV. This is really if you have been in a postdoc position or you're already an assistant professor. You want to let people know that on the very first or second page of your CV. Now, another component that's important to include on your CV are your publications. And this is especially important if you are looking for a research-based position. Here, I didn't have a lot of publications, so I just lumped them all together. What I did is I put them in order from most recent to the most distant past. So things that were in press, I listed those first, and then followed by every year. So things that were published here in 2009, 2008, and so on. You can separate your publications. So you might have a section that's called Publications, Peer-Reviewed Journals, and then a second section called Publications, Books or Book Chapters. If you have a lot of publications, I might suggest doing that type of differentiation. But if you don't have a lot of publications, go ahead and just put them in one section. Now, a thing that I have really seen, especially for people that are graduating right now or who are recent graduates, and so you then just ask this question, should I put things that are in preparation? I would say yes, if they are about to go out the door. So if somebody asked for it, you wouldn't be embarrassed to give it to them, right? So maybe it's just going in the final round of edits, or you're just finishing the discussion section. I have seen a few CVs that'll have 7 things that are in preparation. And to me, that seems a little bit much and maybe a little bit exaggerative. If you have 7 things that are just about to be submitted, then I would feel free putting those on there. But I want you to think, if somebody asked, hey, I'd like to see that publication that you're just about to finish, if you have it and you're willing to share it, then I think it's okay to put on your CV. That would be my rule of thumb to go by there. And things that are currently under review, definitely put those. So I would probably put those, I'd probably have things that are in press and published, and then I might have a section that's like publications, things under review. And the APA manual actually shows you how to submit that. Usually it says you italicize the title, and then you say manuscript submitted for review or manuscript under review. I would definitely include those because it is something that has been finished and you would be okay to share it with others. Now, notice that I put my publications on the first page of my CV because I was looking for a research-focused job. And then I wanted to follow that with presentations that were also research-focused. So these presentations would be those that are conference presentations that have been peer-reviewed, and you should list things that have been accepted because you're now going to that conference or planning to attend that conference, and then things that you've presented. So it's a little bit hard to see here, but on my first one, you can see that had been accepted. So I went ahead and listed that. And then with my third presentation, I had already presented that. So I say that I have presented that. I don't put on things here that are under review, but you could if you want to. Again, don't be exaggerative unless you have a product that you could share with someone if they ask to see that conference presentation proposal. And then you might want to include research funding. I didn't have any of this on my CV, so I left this section off, and I will go ahead and put this up here to not worry if you do not have this section. I think that most people leave their PhD program without research funding. Some of you might have some intramural seed funding or dissertation funding, and you could put that on there. But if you don't have this section, no biggie, all right? That's not an expectation that we would have for people that are just finishing their PhD.
Sarah,
Yes, go ahead, Jess.
there's a question about listing conferences
Yeah.
that were accepted but canceled due to COVID.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
great question, Andrew. I have. So on my current CV, I have put those on there. And so I had something at ARA. So I said, I think like lecture accepted at ARA. And then at the very end, I then put, I think in brackets or something, canceled due to COVID-19. Because that, I mean, to me, it was great that we got accepted to ARA. That's not the easiest thing to do. And so I would include all of those that were accepted, but then maybe went virtual or were canceled basically because of the pandemic. And since everybody's in this pandemic right now, everyone's going to have those. And I think Marie just put a really helpful link about how to put those on your CV.
I was just about to post the link that
Oh,
Marie
okay, great.
had,
Oh,
but
that's great.
APA released guidelines on how to cite those on your CV.
Yeah. So then I placed my teaching experience. So I was more focused on research-focused jobs instead of teaching-focused jobs. So you can see that this is down here on page 3 or 4 of my CV. I can't see the page number right now. But I had some teaching experience, but I differentiated it. So in a few examples, I was an instructor, and then I was also a teaching assistant. If you've done any guest lectures, this would be the place to put those in as well. And then I followed that with some research experience. So if you are applying for a research focused job, you might want to provide a little bit more detail about what you did on that job. So you can see here, I had some bullet points about here's exactly what I did in this research position. And then if you have any professional expertise, so if you have expertise in statistics or you've done some workshops or like MOOCs or something where you feel like you have some certification that hasn't been represented on your CV, this would be a good place to put that. Maybe you've attended the IES meta-analysis workshop, and so you feel really comfortable doing meta-analyses. That might be a good place to thing to put under professional expertise. And then you want to put awards and honors. Again, if you don't have any of these, just leave this section off. Mine were honors bestowed within my university, but I still shared those. And then you want to share your service. I did some, workshops for school districts. I also was a counselor at camp for kids with muscular dystrophy. This is a place to put any journal reviews you've done, any committees that you sit on at the university level or a national level or at a state level. You can have lots of different kinds of service, and you'll see in some of our example CVs how they have placed in their service. So those are the 12 components that we thought we would focus on today, but there are probably more to add to this list. But those are the common ones that you'll see on CVs again and again. Maria has, hey Maria, it's nice to see you, has a question about a job that has research and teaching. If you have part-time teaching positions, I might put those under academic employment, really, especially if you're going to put that toward the top of your CV so that they see that you already have teaching experience. But then maybe you go into more detail, especially with like your course ratings and such. You put that information in your teaching experience a little bit later.
And Sarah,
Now, yeah, go ahead.
Question. I'm just going to backtrack here. An earlier question, if you have grants that are under review.
That's really up to you. I choose not to put those on my CV, but Jess, do you put those on your CV under review ones?
In my early career, I did not. Now I do, mainly because I want to be able to show like the next thing
that's coming up
in my pipeline.
Yeah.
And I think maybe as I got closer to tenure, I included it just to make it clear what was happening, what I was working on. But early in my career, I did not.
But I think again, it's really what you feel comfortable with. So if you are a doc student and you have submitted a grant, or maybe you're a co-investigator or a co-PI in a grant, it might be a good thing to list that, and just do review how to list it, that you haven't received the funding, but that it is pending or under review. Because again, you don't want to be exaggerative of the things that you have done. Tanya talks about a leadership section. I think that would be really nice, especially if you've been like a president of an organization, or maybe a leader of statewide efforts. That also could fall under service. Like a lot of times under service, I have a lot of different subheaders of university service, national service, journal reviews, and so that might be a nice place to put your service as well. And Amanda asks about internships. I would probably put those kind of where it makes sense. So was that a research internship? Maybe you researched with a policy organization in DC. I would probably put that under research experience, or you could create another section that has internships or employment that you've engaged in there. And Lauren asks, you separate first author pubs versus non-first author? I don't, Lauren. I typically list things in order from most recent to the most distant past. So if you have 2 publications in the same year, I list them alphabetically, just like you would do in a references list. So I always keep that order, but you've got to come up with what makes sense for you, but then just apply that consistently.
I'll add to that too, Sarah. I do, and a lot of people do. I always bold my name in my reference. So it's like very clear when someone scans through where
you fall on that. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And I think in all of our example CVs that we'll look at today, they all did that. I just never did that. I don't know why. But again, you can see people really individualize these things to make it what they want it to be. Now, in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Danielle also asked about peer-reviewed versus invited publications. And I think that those can be, a lot of people will actually add on there, they'll either maybe add a star or something like that and say these are invited publications versus just things that you've submitted. Or I've even seen people put, and I'd have to look at APA, but just even put little parentheses or something after that say invited.
I think
just to kind of
that's
highlight those.
very good. Yeah. I would definitely do separate sections or make it very obvious what was invited and what was not. Now, I think the thing is, if you've only ever done 2 presentations and one was invited and one was at a conference, I'd probably just put them under the same header. I think you can get to a point where you have like too many headers with only one thing under them. So think about what works for you. And I think, as Jessica pointed out, like later in my career, I kind of shifted to doing this other thing. You know, your CV is a working document, and so it's always changing. So your CV and what it looks like now is probably not going to be the same CV that you have 3 years from now. Now, just to point out some very quick things here, your structure is going to really change depending upon who you are and what jobs you're applying for. So if you're just finishing your PhD this year and you're focused on a research-focused position, you know, you might leave out research funding and teaching experience because you don't have those. If you are applying for a research position and you've been doing a postdoc, then you might have some research funding to put on there, and maybe you don't have any awards or honors, so you leave that section off. And you can also rearrange these sections. This is not an order that's dictated by anyone. This is just the suggested components, and then you have to come up with the order that makes sense for you. And if you're applying for a teaching focused position, instead of having that section called research interest, it might be teaching interest. You may not have publications, and so you may leave that section off. And here I would probably move your teaching experience up to like falling right underneath the education component, and then moving everything to later in your CV. So there's a lot of flexibility here and a lot of things that you can move around. So we just talked about the structure of the CV. Now I want to talk about the look of your CV. And I would suggest that you have to think about 3 things. This is just to get you started. There might be more than that. It needs to look professional, it needs to look consistent, and it needs to be error-free. So what do we mean by professional? Does a CV look like that of an academic? So is it set up pretty consistently to other CVs? And again, there's wiggle room there. Be a little bit creative, be a little bit creative, but don't overly reinvent the CV, all right? And also think about your font. Does your font look like a kindergarten font, or does it look like a professional font that you would turn in for a journal review or for a conference presentation? My biggest suggestion here is to look at the CVs of others. So who are some of your mentors? Who are people that you look up to? And who are people that just graduated that have gotten jobs? Let's go ahead and look at their CVs so you get a good idea of what yours might want to look like as well. Amy, you asked K-12 teaching and leadership on the CV. Usually I put that under teaching experience, but you also could put that under a separate section that says, you know, K-12 teaching or K-12 experience. In terms of look, be consistent. So how are you going to format your CV? What font are you use? What font size are you going to use? Be consistent with that. I can't tell you how much it bothers me when I see a 12-point font in one section and a 10-point font in another section. Does it follow APA formatting? I think this is probably one of the things that bothers me the most when I look at CVs of people that are applying for jobs at our university. If I see a lot of APA formatting mistakes on your CV, it really calls into question how you can prepare a manuscript for publication. So really make sure that that follows APA formatting. I even hang the publications in my CV to be very similar to what you would do in a manuscript. Does your tense change throughout the manuscript? If it's something that you've done in the past, I would expect that you're writing that in the past tense. If it's something that you're working on right now, I would expect that that is written in the present tense. And then be consistent with your presentation of dates. Again, I think almost everyone present stuff from it's happening now to this happened in the distant past. And another thing is to be okay with white space. Remember, you don't have a page limitation here. And white space helps the reviewer of your CV really kind of like get all of the information that they need. So be okay to have a few hard returns in there. Be okay to spread things out. You don't want to do it too much, but just enough. So, and then make sure it's error-free. I can't emphasize this enough. So you should edit it and then check it, and then have someone else edit, and then maybe have a non-academic look at it, and then you edit again and check it again. So you cannot look at this CV enough, but do make sure it is error-free. So your structure is really important and your look is important. So I asked a few of our DR members to share their CVs when they went for jobs initially. And 3 people shared with us. We're very grateful to them for sharing their CVs with us. They all did say, my CV looks better now. And I said, I know, but what did it look like when you were finishing up? So this is a CV from Robin Ennis. She's currently at the University of Alabama and a DR member. And so I'll just let you kind of take these things in. You can kind of see how she set up hers. On each page, I just wanted to point out 1 or 2 things that I thought were important to bring out. Here, Robin has certification. So she's a board certified behavior analyst. She's also certified to teach special ed K through 12 and secondary education 7 through 12. And she listed that on the first page of her CV. So Amy, that might be where you could also list your teaching certifications there as well. Then you see she follows this by professional experience and honors, and then gets into her peer-reviewed publications. And just as Jessica emphasized, Robin bolds her name. And so it's really easy to look down this list and see, what author order she was when she was working on these publications. She separates peer-reviewed publications. Like on the left-hand side, these are all things that are either in press or have been published. And then she has this separate section that says peer-reviewed publications, things that are under review, in revision, or in preparation. So you can see that she differentiated there. And then she has this other, I think she has an annotated bibliography that she wrote, and that falls under other publications. Continuing, she has her presentations. She lists the professional organizations to which she belongs. And then she has service. So you can see she's been guest reviewers, guest editors, proposal reviewers, and she lumps each of those so it's very easy to find the different types of service that she's done. And then she follows by courses taught. And I liked that you can see she includes her course ratings here. So she's, here's the course, here's about the course, and here was my rating when I was teaching this course. This is from Sarah Nagro at George Mason University. She's also a DR member. So you can see, she's got her contact information, her education. Here's her professional experience. Here she, on her first page, it says professional experience, and there's 4 things. These are the things that Sarah really does and does well. And so she is hitting the reviewer in the face with this experience that she has. And then you can see she has her name bolded within her publications. Sarah graduated a little bit later than some of us. So this is a CV, I think, from 2015. And so she has these DOIs and they're linked, and she includes the impact factors. And I like all of those things. I would love to be able to look at her CV and actually click on these publications, and it takes me to the publication or the journal website. And then she has a separate section, you can see, manuscripts submitted for peer review. Here she does have some funding, so she put that on there. And then I do like under her leadership and service, she talks about, I was elected to this, I was selected for that, I volunteered. So she's very clear. Remember, she's never exaggerative of the things that she is doing. Be honest.
Can we pause
And then
for questions?
yeah, let me get through this page and then we'll pause here. And then I think another thing that I liked about Sarah's CV is she has her name at the top with page numbers, which is important because sometimes these things are printed out. And so that would help us find it if we lost page 5. And then another thing I really liked about Sarah's CV is that she listed her affiliations. So, all right, so let's take some questions.
We have a question that I got of how many publications are expected of us in terms of new graduates looking for jobs?
I don't, it really varies. I would say a few, maybe 1 or 2, but then some people may have more. I know Robin had a lot of publications because she worked at a research university during her master's degree and published during her master's degree. So not all of those publications came out of her PhD experience. I would say, a few, a handful. Jess, do you have a number that you want to throw out there? Or Bree, do you have a number?
I think it differs a lot depending on where you're applying and what the position is looking for.
Yeah.
But I think when you graduate from your doc program, having at least a few, like Sarah said, or being involved in publications doesn't mean they're all your own that you did by yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It really just depends.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Andrew has a question. At what point do you make footnotes for grad or undergrad involvement? Andrew, for me, that really came as I was starting to go up for tenure because they explicitly ask for that. So that's where you may put an asterisk next to every name on an author list that was a student that you were working with. I don't think it feels disingenuous to signify that if you're still a postdoc, because many times postdocs are mentoring those students. So if you feel that you are in a mentorship role and that person who you want to put that asterisk by would agree to that, I would go ahead and put that on my CV. Emily asked, should grant-funded projects always follow presentations? No. At this point, Emily, I put my research funding above my publications. Like I've, now that I'm at this point in my career where that's more important, what funding I have than what publications I have. So again, take those components and make it work for you.
I will add to that, Sarah, when we talk about how your CV changes over time. Now, so when you're looking at CVs of mentors or people online, I do now include my grants before publications. And maybe that will change again in future, but now I do. But that is not how I did it 5 years ago.
Well, and you could see on my original CV, I had no grants, right? So I didn't even include that information. Catherine is asking, I'm going to teach 3 classes. I would include, so should I include the ones for which I prepared all of the materials with some adaptations from the professor? Yes, if you've included those materials, I would put those on your CV. And maybe you can figure out a way to also list the ones in which maybe you were a teaching assistant and then maybe you're an instructor. There also might be other language that your university uses. But yeah, if you are prepping those materials and you are teaching that coursework, I would include those as separate entities on your CV. So then our third example, this is our last example here today, comes from Jeremy Ford. This is the CV that he used to apply for the job that he has now, which is at Boise State University. One of the things I noticed that is maybe new that we haven't seen before is Jeremy is licensed as a school psychologist, and so he put that on the first page of his CV. He followed that up with his first research experience and then teaching experience. And I really liked in his teaching experience how he said, I'm an instructor, I'm a teaching assistant, or I'm a guest lecturer. So it's very clear. I could know guest lecturer probably popped in once, teaching assistant spent the whole time, but probably didn't teach all of the classes in the class. And then an instructor probably taught all of the coursework. He also put in here, this gets to the invited presentations. So you can see he has invited presentations and then paper presentations. So he separated those. He also separated his publications. Here's peer-reviewed publications versus book chapters and other writing. I like how he said that. And then he has his poster presentations followed by research assistants and affiliations and honors and awards. So I don't think as we look at these CVs, any of them are identical, but many of them are consistent in the information that they provide. So we asked some current professors who are also DR members at universities, when you read a CV, what stands out? So let's see what they say.
What stands out to me in a CV is often whether the person has a line of research that they can call their own. Might be similar to their advisors, might even be in the same content area, but do they have a line of research that's evident by publications and presentations that they can take with them into an assistant faculty position and be successful?
Certainly publications, looking for peer-reviewed publications, but not necessarily raw numbers. I'm looking for an applicant to have a leadership role in several publications. First authorship is fantastic. That stands out. I'm also looking at the type of papers they are. Are they empirical studies? Um, Certainly, I place greater value and greater weight on empirical studies, meta-analyses, literature syntheses, as opposed to commentaries or opinion pieces. Um, I'm also looking for efforts to obtain funding and perhaps some initial success in obtaining funding. Now, this could be just small internal grants. This could be things like dissertation grants, early career types of awards. Um, Certainly doesn't have to be large scale, but at least that the applicant is involved in the process for competing for funding and is showing some indication that they're successful at doing that.
I feel like we really are looking for potential, especially when we know we are looking for at a doctoral student's CV. So if we know you are still in school, we're not going to be holding you quite to the same bar as someone who has been an assistant professor for 5 years already. We understand the difference of that and the difference in opportunities. Obviously publications always, grant writing always really stands out. Places where it shows that you can really stand on your own 2 feet, we're not too reliant just on your advisor. So if you have a sole publication, if even if there's small dissertation grants that you wrote and sought after, it shows again that you weren't just partnering with your advisor, but you were really, you're able and capable and ready to hit the ground running when you get here, because you've had experience kind of doing some of this on your own too.
All right, so you can see that's what some faculty members who sit on search committees are looking for. So now we're going to shift gears to think about how do I write a cover letter, and we will have a little time at the end to come back to CV questions if you have those. So a cover letter is a letter that explains who you are and why you are a strong applicant for the job that you are applying to. And I would suggest that this letter is the most important part of your application because many people are going to read this letter more carefully than your CV. So this letter explains who you are, and we want to make sure that it has a strong structure and look. So in terms of structure, this is my letter that I wrote for a job that I did not get. I got a job eventually, so I want to let you know, you don't get all the jobs. But I'll share a little bit of my letter, and then I'll share a letter from 2 others. But typically this letter includes information about your background. So here's where I am right now and what I've been doing. Typically your letter will include something about your research experience. So I was applying for a research job, so I talked a lot about my research experience. Typically your letter will talk a little bit about your dissertation. So where you are in your dissertation, what it's about, whether it's finished or whether you're still working on it, and if you're still working on it, when it's going to be finished. Typically your letter might include some information about publications. I just had little call outs, but do note that I did not list every publication that I've ever done because that's already been shown in my CV. You may want to talk about teaching experience in your cover letter. You may want to include any honors or awards that you have been awarded. And you may want to include your service. I didn't have that in my letter. And I will actually say when I looked back, I think my letter's a little brief, which is maybe why I didn't get this job. I have no idea. But the other letters that we're going to look at are all at least 4 pages long. So probably 3 to 4 pages is where you want to be with your cover letter, but probably not more than that. Most people don't want to read more than 4 pages about you. And so when we think about the structure, you want to include those components, but it's really up to you as to how you present them. I think you need to think about telling your story and what is your story as an academic and how can you tell that story in a smart and thoughtful way. But then you also want to make sure that it looks professional that it's consistent, and that it is also error-free. So everything that we talked about for the CV also applies here for your cover letter. So there's a few, I had 2 people share their cover letters with us. This is from Jeremy Ford at Boise State University. A few things that I noted in his cover letter. In the first paragraph, he says, here's when I'm going to finish my PhD, because I bet he read in the job description that you had to finish by a certain time. Another thing that I liked about Jeremy is that he used acronyms or initialisms very sparingly. I've read cover letters where it's like, there's 10 different acronyms that are used, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of those. So you can see here he talks about CBM and DD, but beyond that, and I think he has a test that the SV-S, but beyond that, he spells things out. So it's easier for a reader, especially a reader who may not be familiar with Jeremy's area of research, to understand. And Jeremy also included proper citations. I haven't seen that in a lot of cover letters, but I liked it. And he cited them appropriately according to APA. On his 3rd page here, he talks about classes that he's taught. He includes his teacher ratings. If people were asking, how well did he do in his teaching, it's very obvious that that's on the page. And then he included this reference page, which I have never seen before, but I thought was a nice touch to the letter. I don't know if I would include that if I was writing a cover letter again, but again, this is up to you. And this is the cover letter from Robin Ennis. This was also for a job that she applied for. I don't think she got this job, but she got another job in the same year. She has a very brief review of her expertise in the first paragraph. And one of the things I thought was so great about this cover letter when I read it is she has these headers. And so we see a research header, we see a teaching header, and we see a service header. So it's really easy to go to the point in the letter where I can figure out how has Robin taught, what service has Robin done, and what research has she done. I liked how she embedded her publications within research, and she also talked about service within her research section. She described her teaching methods, which I thought was really interesting to read. And then over here, she has a really strong closing paragraph. Actually, both Jeremy and Robin, kind of make the case for why you should hire them. And then the other thing that Robin did, which I have never seen before, but I also liked, is she included this one-page graphic organizer that synthesizes her. And I thought this was great. So I wanted to share it with you. She was also willing to share it with you as well. You might want to do something like this. Again, it's not mandatory, but as a committee is sitting around and looking at all these applications, sometimes 40, 80 applications, might be nice to have something to go to be like, what, I think we should interview Robin, and here's why. It's very easy to find that information. So we asked faculty members, when you read a cover letter, what stands out? Let's see what they say.
So number 1, what stands out is the passion and the fit. We can tell what you have accomplished in terms of publication, whatnot, just by looking at your CV. If you played a really key role in a major grant or something like that, that you just feel like expanding on that line on your CV will really help give us a better picture, by all means do it. But really, we are like, and I think every institution is just really looking for someone who is just going to really bring a level of commitment and passion and an area of expertise to whatever the gap is on the team that we are looking to either fill or further strengthen.
So I think for me, in terms of a cover letter, I want to know that a person has a clear vision of where they want their line of research to go, and that research is interesting and impactful. And so I'm really impressed when I see applicant letters that make a clear description of how someone was in the field of special education before they were in the classroom or in a clinic or somehow working with individuals with disabilities, and that motivated them to pursue a research career, and that they have a clear idea of where they want their research career to go in the future. And so I think that kind of vision of having an understanding of what you hope to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years as a faculty member is one of the most impressive things that I see, and that I think really stands out for me. I think other things, seeing that in your PhD program or before, you played different leadership roles, that you were involved in research projects, particularly projects that you took a leadership role on. I think those are also important.
The question about applicants' cover letter is a great one. I was on a search, I chaired a search last fall where we purposefully wrote the job ad very broadly to get a large pool of candidates. And guess what? We got a large pool of candidates. It was like over 65 candidates, which is a lot in our field in education to go through. So it's absolutely critical. I cannot emphasize this enough, that you applicants out there, write your letter to align with the job ad. You'd be surprised, and more so at the assistant professor level, you see this, but you'd be surprised how people don't always attend to everything that's in the job ad in their letter. So here's a hint. Just as if you were writing a grant application, you can create headers in your letter that are aligned with like the required qualifications of the job and the preferred qualifications. So the point of your letter is to show that I'm the best fit for this job, and here's why and how. So that is absolutely critical in a cover letter.
All right, so now we are going to be joined by Sarah Wilkinson. Sarah, I saw you joined us, so you can unmute your microphone. And we invited Sarah to be with us today. Well, first of all, she's a DR member, so she's wonderful. Sarah is a new assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, and last year at this time, she was in your shoes. So Sarah, if you would like to tell us where you were last year and what you were doing when you were going on the job market, and specifically, we'd like you to share with us, how did you develop your CV, and then how did you write your cover letter? What was your process for doing this?
Sure, thank you, Sarah. And Jess, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So this time last year, I was a doctoral candidate at the University of Connecticut, and was, I don't know, I guess right at this time last year, I was waiting for IRB approval for my dissertation, and mostly applying to jobs as a full-time position at that point, while I waited for the IRB to come back. So, I think as far as just briefly background about me, I really wanted to work in a more teaching-oriented position. So I had that at the forefront of my mind as I developed my job materials. That said, I did have a couple different versions for the more research-oriented positions that I did apply for, but the ones that most of the materials I had were really oriented toward teaching. So that's just sort of where I am and what I wanted to do with my life. But I guess I have just a couple bullet points of kind of my advice / process overall that I've been thinking about. And to start, I think it's relevant to both the CV and the cover letter. So first, I asked a ton of people for samples and if they'd be willing to share samples with me. And, I've been here for a couple minutes, so I've seen that you've been doing that on this webinar, but also I just asked folks, do you mind sharing your stuff? And quite honestly, nobody said no. And this fall, a few people have asked me and I've happily shared. So I do think that is a pretty common thing to do and, sort of expected. And I tried to collect lots of different samples. So, my advisor had offered me her things, but she's also been a professor for a long time in the same job. So they weren't necessarily as updated as what I would be creating, just last year. And I also asked friends of mine who had recently graduated and gotten positions. And I made sure to reach out to folks in the type of job that I wanted as well. So I did that for both the CV and the cover letter. I think I based mine off of different elements from the samples I collected that I really liked. Similar actually to what you were just showing with the cover letters, I sort of just took my collection of samples and picked out the parts that I really liked. When I saw one with headers, for example, I was like, that's genius. I love how clear that makes it. And I made sure to include that. So, I was using those as models, particularly for structure. I didn't need them to tell me what work I had done, but I didn't know how to present it. And that was really helpful. Similarly, and again, this is true for both the CV and the cover letter, I asked for feedback from a wide variety of people. So both from faculty members and from peers. So I think getting feedback from different people presents its own challenges. And you all know that from having, gotten reviews back on manuscripts and such. But it was really helpful because you could sort of pinpoint if there were themes about a sentence that was unclear, or if there was an area where people asked for more detail. Sometimes if you only ask one person, it's not necessarily a good indication of multiple people reading your stuff. So I did ask for a variety of feedback. Again, I think everybody's busy, so doing it graciously and offering to swap with folks who are in the same position as you is helpful. The one thing that I did have to be a little bit more creative about was I really wanted feedback from somebody who'd been on a search committee at a teaching-oriented institution. So I actually went back to two faculty members that I had in my master's program that were at more teaching-oriented institutions. So I think being gracious and kind and just asking for a favor is helpful. Most people want to try out, or help people out. So lots of samples and lots of feedback was kind of like my go-to strategy overall. As far as developing the CV, my suggestion honestly is to always have it as a working document. So I feel like I didn't actually have to do a whole lot for my CV. I reordered a couple sections depending on whether the job was focusing on teaching or research, but I'm relatively well organized. So I had always been updating my CV. Every time something was appropriate to add, I just added it.
That's a good strategy. I'm glad you were using that. Makes it a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know not everybody does that, but I feel like if you can do it, it makes it way easier when it's time to apply or somebody asks you for a CV. And then as far as the cover letter, my process was really, once I took a look at the samples and kind of had an idea of my format, I'm like a dump and then cut kind of writer. So I had a really detailed and long cover letter at first, knowing that 3/4 of it was not going to be part of the final draft. But I think for me, it's easier to get all the thoughts out and then summarize them. So that was the method I took as far as cover letters. And then I wrote it early and did a lot of revising. I would give myself time between drafts. So I'm sure we've all run into things or situations where you're writing and it's close to a deadline and you don't necessarily have time between finishing your writing and then rereading it. But time helps with clarifying thoughts and noticing errors. So I tried to, at least have a couple days in between when I finished a draft and then when I would go back to it. Reading out loud, I did a lot because that helped me catch errors. And then asking friends again, do you mind taking a look? Does this make sense? So awesome. That's what I wrote down as far as my advice.
Well, and it worked because you are now in Wisconsin, and are you enjoying your new job?
I am. I really love it. I mean, it's definitely
Great.
Not exactly what I envisioned given COVID, but that's the case for everybody. So.
That is true. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight as a person who's just gone through this process. I am sure that our attendees appreciate that advice. So most of these are pretty similar to what we've talked about today and what Sarah was just saying, but in terms of tips, start writing early and edit. And also remember, I think Sarah kind of alluded to this, more is not necessarily better. So a really tight 3-page cover letter might be better than a 5-page rambling cover letter. As the faculty said, match your CV and cover letter to the job description. So you may have a really general cover letter, but then fine tune it. Put the university's name in there. Why do you want to work at that university, and what can you add to that university's faculty? But do remember, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, so don't send these general letters out. It's very obvious when you're on a search committee who basically just sent all the letters out to everyone and who probably didn't even really want to work at this specific university. And then be creative but be professional. So we have a little bit more advice from some of our current DR members who have just recently gotten jobs. I'm going to go ahead and play this video, and this would be a good time to put any questions in the chat box if you have them, and then we'll be back to answer those questions and finish up for today.
Get organized. I love a spreadsheet. List where you've applied, what their requirements are, when have you obtained all the documents, when everything is due, who you've asked for recommendations, every detail for each school so you can keep track of where you are in the process. I'd also say write down some concrete thoughts about your philosophy of teaching. What do you hope students achieve when they're in your class? What do you hope to accomplish as a researcher? So you keep in mind who you are when you're trying to describe yourself in your cover letter.
So there's a couple here. I would suggest having multiple people read them, and not only your fellow cohort mates, but also having faculty members who have sat on the job application process to read them also, because they can provide some insight. The other thing is, it is really important to tailor your cover letter and then maybe your teaching philosophy statement, your research statement for the job description listed. And that I can speak to that. Running 2 searches at OU, it was very apparent. It was very apparent to who did that and who didn't. And if you don't do that, I don't think it's the end of the world per se, but it does show that you're not maybe as invested in that specific job at that university.
I would say my top tips would be to have a template for each application, or for all your applications, but have a template that's not super complete, so it forces you to write and tailor the descriptions in your letters and in your application package to that specific institution, and work from that template and not edit other applications, because then you're sort of in danger of submitting some information that might not be accurate to that institution. And it's also a way to get you to personalize the application. The other thing that I did was tracked my applications in a spreadsheet, that I used color codes to make sure that I could visually see the different stages of the applications, whether it's due dates, putting together the submission, actually submitting the application, through the process of hearing back and interviews and things like that.
My number 1 tip would be to start early and create a cover letter for your dream job. Then when you start applying, you can work off this initial cover letter and tweak it to fit the job posting. Really pay attention to the details in that posting and make sure that you edit it accordingly. Then I had someone that doesn't know my research agenda, like my aunt, who is also an academic but in nursing. I had her read it so that she could then see if I captured myself accurately. And I had her summarize what she knew about my research after reading it to give myself an idea of how well I did. Pay attention to deadlines and whether they're rolling or not. Keep everything organized so you can easily pull your transcripts, your CVs, all the things that you need for your job, your statements. And then on the note of CVs, if you're not already updating it regularly, start doing so. Every new acceptance to a conference or a paper, add it into your CV right away. This will save you a lot of time. And then finally, ask your 3 letters of recommendation as soon as possible to give them the time that they need.
All right. So one of the things that was mentioned in there that we haven't talked about today was letters of recommendation. I'll go to the next slide here. Whoops, I don't want to play it again. Letters of recommendation. I think we should leave a little bit of time, maybe early next week, to talk about that. And 2 other things that we didn't talk about are sometimes job applications ask you to submit a research statement and a teaching statement, and those are different from a cover letter. So we know that those are out there, and maybe Jessica is going to lead next next week's session, but maybe we kick off those sessions kind of talking about other parts of the application that you may be asked to submit that we really didn't focus on today because those aren't always required. So we want to finish up today just by reminding you that this is put on by the Division of Research, and if you'd like to send in a small donation because you like this programming, that will help DR do other programs similar to this. And please join us next week, next Friday, October 16th, and Jessica Toss is going to lead us in what should you expect in an initial interview. So I'm really looking forward to that session and learning everything that we can. If you have any other questions, this is a good time to unmute your microphone and talk to us, or put any questions in the group chat. And all of these sessions are going to be recorded and put up on the DR YouTube website, YouTube site, and also follow DR on Twitter and follow DR on Facebook, and then you will receive instant notification as to when that is now put up on the YouTube site.
Also, if you received the reminder email from me yesterday, there's a link to the DR YouTube channel right in there, so you can click.
Super.
And it usually will take us a few days to get it posted up, just to get the closed captioning and everything done.
All right, so are there any questions that we can answer specific to you or generalized to the process of applying for a job?
This is Maria Hugh. I do have another question.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I'm just thinking about some deadlines. Sometimes the postings are posted within 2 or 3 weeks of a deadline. I'm wondering if this might be relevant to other people. And trying to develop really tailored materials in a short time frame. How important, especially in today's market, is it to meet that first deadline when it's rolling, or is there a few weeks of wiggle room? What does that look like?
My gut reaction is to meet the deadline. You know, your cover letter can be kind of generic, but I would always, at least in the first paragraph and the last paragraph, saying like, I am applying for the assistant professor position at the University of Texas at Austin, and I am excited about this opportunity because, right? And then maybe at the end you could say why you're excited to go to that university. It probably doesn't have to get much more detailed than that, but with deadlines, often those deadlines are set and then the search committee is many times going to meet the next week. So I would put making the deadline, I would put that above making this, you know, beautiful tailored cover letter.